at 6 o'clock, so it must be 6 o'clock. Welcome back, everyone. I call out a recess from December 16th, Lee County Zoning Board of Appeals hearing on petition 201555, Stewart Creek, excuse me. Devco LLC's petition for special use permit to construct, to repower, as they're calling it, a wind energy system. The Zoom meeting ID, for those of you who aren't already on Zoom but are scrambling to find it in case you're listening on YouTube, the meeting ID is 915-3923-9154. Repeating 915-3923-9154. Password is, as it has been continually, 209840. If you want to join us and want to view us, not join us, view us or listen to us on YouTube, you go to your browser, www.youtube.com, all run together. In the search bar, type Lee County IL, IR, Zoning Board of Appeals. Don't be worried about our lowercase letters. Drop down box should allow you to pick the session date you want. If you want to watch us live, it's obviously January 4th, 2021. Happy New Year, everyone. For technical assistance, you may call 815-973-34. I note, back from the holidays and present in attendance, our zoning board of appeals members, the chair, Mr. Forster, and vice chair, Mr. Burrow, Mr. Bolton, with us, and Mr. Hughes. They're all personally present. Over my shoulder, I note the presence of the Honorable Mike Pratt, who is joining us on Zoom. Mr. Stryker is here with one of his company representatives. Our IT expert Alice and her mentor, Mike McBride, are present. Court board is present, and of course himself as well. We have 9 people in the third floor courtroom of the old Lee County Courthouse. Ms. Duffy, Mr. Boonstra, and Mr. McBride are hovering around the edges outside, meaning there are 12 people in the facility, but only 9 in the meeting room, which complies with the governor's present mitigation protocol. All right, I think that's all no, it's not. Apologize. In anticipation of 1 or 2 more future dates for this matter, actually 3. Would everybody get out their calendars, please? Bear with me as we go through this again. First date I'm eyeing is Wednesday, the 27th. Wednesday, the 27th. Mr. Forster.
Yes.
Mr. Burrow.
Yes.
Mr. Bolton.
Yes.
Mr. Hughes.
Yes.
Mr. Pratt. Mike Pratt.
She's got to unmute me. There she goes. Yes. You hear me?
Yep, sure do. Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Duffy?
Yeah.
Alice?
Yes.
Mr. State's Attorney?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Stryker?
Yes, Judge.
Kelly?
Yes.
And Mike McBride, if you can hear me.
Yes.
Great. Monday, the 1st of February. Mr. Forster?
Yes.
Mr. Burrow?
Yes.
Mr. Bothy?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Pratt?
Yes.
Ms. Duffy? Alice?
Yes.
Mr. Boonstra?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Stryker?
Yes, Judge.
Kelly?
Yes.
Mike McBride? We'll assume so. One more. Tuesday, the 2nd of February. Mr. Forster?
Yes.
Mr. Burrow?
Yes.
Mr. Bothy? Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Pratt?
Yes.
Dee Duffy,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes.
Mr. State's Attorney,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Stricker,
Yes, Judge.
Kelly,
Yes.
and Mike McBride. Okay. So then after tomorrow, well, I'll just say after tonight, the available dates are Tuesday, January 5th, Monday, February 1st, and Tuesday, February 2nd.
Judge, was January 19th?
Yeah. No,
No?
I don't think so. It was, but it's not. Okay. I think now that's all housekeeping stuff, and you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. And thank you, members of the ZBA. I hope everybody had a nice few years. Thank you to Lee County staff. We're happy to be.
We have one more person in the room. Let's count heads. Is that somebody?
That's Terry, our second witness.
2, 3, 4, 5. That's 10, yeah. Okay, good.
Can you hear me?
What's the number? What's the number on
Number
your?
9.
Say again.
9.
Let me try. How about now?
Okay. Perfect.
I do everything around that.
Again, thanks to everybody. As you remember when we met December 16th, we presented Jim Cutie and we got through about an hour and 15 minutes of his testimony. As we start off tonight, we have Jim here again to finish up, and I think that you'll find this to be the most interesting part of the testimony because we're really going to get into the heart of the repowering, why we're doing this, and what the repowered project is going to look like. We're also going to talk about the planned decommissioning process this evening, which I'm sure is of interest to all of you. Briefly go through some of more of the Lee County ordinance criteria and how we believe that this planned repowering meets with that criteria. Provide all of you with a very brief update on where we are with the road use agreement. We did, as you may remember, work out one with Lee County and a number of townships in 2019, and we're working through that process on a parallel track with this, and then briefly touch upon the 2 categories of variance requests. So with that, Judge, I'd like to call Mr. Cutie back to the stand.
Mm-hmm. Since it's been 2 weeks, it's just simply got to be put under oath or affirmation again. You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, whole truth, and none but the truth.
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Cutie. And as you remember, we left off in the testimony on the 16th, talking about the various ordinance standards and specifically with regard to setbacks and the FAA criteria that we have to meet. And we were now ready to transition into what, as you heard me mention, CBA members, I think is one of the most interesting parts of your testimony, which is let's talk about the repowering specifically. So if we can start off with talking about how the repowered turbines are different from existing turbines. I think that's probably, along with the reuse of the existing turbine towers, really the key to this whole repowering.
Absolutely, Mr. Striker, and thank you. Thanks again to the members and Judge Slade. Since the project development and construction originally occurred approximately 10 years ago, there have been significant advancements and improvements in wind turbine technology. All turbines will be sourced from a tier 1 manufacturer, that tier 1 manufacturer being GE. Tier 1 is a term used in the wind industry. It typically refers to one of the top 3 manufacturers, GE, Vestas, and Siemens Gamesa. Compared to the current existing wind turbines, which are now, as I said, almost a decade old, the proposed repowered GE turbines will provide state-of-the-art technology advancements to the project site, which will allow the repowered turbines to produce significantly more energy per turbine, approximately 30% more, and reduce the operation and maintenance costs of the units. Furthermore, repowering the project will reduce the total number of wind turbines from 114 to 97 and will increase the production of clean renewable energy in Illinois. The project will use turbines from the GE 2.7 116 family. These include the 2.5 megawatt 116 and the 2.3 megawatt 116 variants. These are described in the GE document, which are included in the zoning in the application, entitled Technical Documentation, Wind Turbine Generation Systems 2X 116/127.
Following up on that, Mr. Cuda, I'm going to present you with what's been marked as Petitioner's Exhibit 1, which is our petition in this case, and application. Exhibit D to that application, I believe, is the document you referred to. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
And just to give the board members a little more color on what's in this document, is there anything you'd like to highlight for them? And specifically, I think with regard to the GE 2.7 family and how they've heard before in 2019 about the GE 2.3 and the 2.5, and now we're talking about a 2.7, but how does all that come together?
The 2.7 megawatt family of turbines are composed of three different size units, a 2.7, a 2.5, and a 2.3. They all have 116 meter rotor diameter. The units themselves are identical. They are the same size, the same machinery, the same technology. They vary only in the software that's applied to the units to make them a 2.7 unit, a 2.5 megawatt unit, or a 2.3 megawatt unit. And it's a specific turbine family that GE has developed specifically for repowering units, and allows them to sort of mix and match the sizes so that they can meet the actual size of a project that's warranted.
Okay, so to summarize for the board, all the turbines we're talking about are part of this GE 2.7 family. But when you as a developer go to order the turbines, you would instruct GE to either produce the turbines with a software package at a 2.5 megawatt or 2.3, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so the external structure is all the same.
That is correct.
Okay.
They are identical.
And I think it was either you or I had mentioned in my opening comments, but that with the developers here, we have a 239 megawatt project, correct?
Correct.
And we're limited to that output by our PJM interconnection?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. So what you as a developer have to do is really put a puzzle together and order the correct number of 2.5s and 2.3s. So by the time the project is repowered, it still equals 239.4 megawatts.
239.4, I believe, is the right number. And that math works out to 92.5 units and 2.3 units.
And if I could, I'm referring to section 3.1 of Exhibit D right now, which is entitled Rotor. Looks like there's two classes of turbines. If you could just describe for the board which one is the 2.7 family, and so they can see some of the commonality here.
They're all 2.7, part of the 2.7 family. The 116 meter rotor diameter can be applied to the 2.7, the 2.5, or the 2.3. Only the 2.7 is the only unit that would get the larger 127.
And we're not going to use that 127 meter diameter.
We are not.
So when I'm looking at section 3.1 here, looks like there's two columns in white. There's a left column that's marked 2.0-2.7-116.
Correct.
And a column on the right that's marked 2.2-2.8-127.
Yes.
We're only talking about the first column.
Column.
Okay, with the 116 designation.
Correct.
And that matches the rotor diameter.
That is correct.
Okay. And Mr. Cutie, you've heard me, and I know you discussed as well, that we think this new family of turbines is going to offer a number of benefits locally. I think one of the primary benefits is it's a quieter turbine. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. It's quieter, particularly at lower wind speeds. And turbines are much more noticeable to an observer at low speed than they are at higher wind speeds. at higher wind speeds, the noise from a turbine is actually drowned out by the sound and the noise of the higher winds that rustles trees, crops, and anything else, and the noise of the wind itself.
Okay, and to back up the fact that we believe this is going to be a quieter turbine, you've commissioned a sound study for this project, correct?
That's correct, and we have modeled that with the 2.5 unit, which is, of course, as I previously described, identical. And Burns and Mac is our contractor for that. They have done a study. They have done a study with 97 units, and that proves out that it's quieter, at least theoretical. They will actually be out in the field subsequent to the commissioning of the turbines and verify that.
Okay, and I think we'll be able to hear from the Burns and Mac expert tomorrow. Sure.
Tomorrow is the correct date for that, sir.
Assuming we go tomorrow.
Yep.
Then if I could, Mr. Cutie, besides the turbines, we've told the ZBA that we intend to use the existing foundations. Can you describe the process of how you figure out if a foundation is actually reusable for purposes of repowering?
Yes, indeed. I'll start with the original foundations. The original foundations are designed with the appropriate amount of rebar and concrete in them based on the loads that the individual turbines put out. Okay. They also incorporate all the particular codes, local, state, and federal, that are necessary to build structures like this. Then in a repower situation, what happens is we look at the new load profile of the new units, in this case, the GE units, and we verify on paper that the load envelope is within the limits of the original foundation. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and that work has been done. That's more of a desktop study, and the desktop studies confirm that all the loads are indeed within the appropriate envelope of that. We take the codes from the current year, in this case it was 2020, and update those, and then look at, go into the field, and we examine the turbines, we examine the foundations, looking for any abnormalities, cracks, any adverse soil conditions that result from that, and verify that since there are no indications of failure, those being cracks, those being soil imperfections, then we'll conclude that the new loads and that the foundations are indeed adequate for the new technology.
Okay. And would that be a third-party engineer that's going out in the field making that determination?
That would be Bar Engineering. They are indeed a third-party engineer. They did the original foundations. They have all the documentation from the original foundations, and they are now doing the final field studies for the repowered foundation.
Okay. So ultimately, Bar will be out in the field and they'll tell you whether or not the foundations are adequate.
That's correct. But right now, on paper, they are indeed adequate. And in the simplest description of that, the foundations themselves are typically overbuilt, initially, and they're overbuilt with a safety factor of what we call 3x, or they're 3 times as strong as they need to be. And once we go out in the field and verify that there are no deficiencies noted in the actual foundations, then you can, relax, if you will, the 3x and verify that these are good, for another 20 years.
I want to follow up on one other statement that you made, is that this GE 2.7 family of turbines was designed for repower. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
And if I could turn your attention to section 2.11 of Exhibit D, it's entitled Tower and Foundation. As I understood it, the tower adapter that's being discussed here, is that one of the real keys to this turbine family?
Yes, it is. The turbine adapter that you described is the transition piece. And the transition piece is a uniquely designed element. It's about 3 foot tall, and it bolts onto a competitor's tower, in this case, the Suzlon tower, and translates that to a GE footprint where the GE nacelle is mounted atop that.
And is this tower adapter, is this one of the things that we as BSW, the applicant here, learned about between 2020 and 2019, between 2019 and 2020, that's really allowed us to think more about reusing the existing towers?
Yes, yes, indeed. I think, just to clarify, I think we knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think, in 2019, there were some other factors that made it more favorable to replace the towers. This gives us an alternative process, if you will, and allows us to have a whole lot less impact on the landscape, the underlying land. We'll have fewer trucks. We won't be taking down the tower. We'll produce less waste, and it's just a cleaner, more cost-efficient job.
Good. That's good to hear. Let me ask you about the collection lines. As we have an existing project, there are existing collection lines out in the field. Do any of those have to be upgraded or modified?
We expect that we'll be upgrading up to 4,000 linear feet of those collection lines. And upgrade is probably not the right description for that. These are more modifications. And recall, we're taking away 17 units, and the collection lines go to that particular turbine, if you will. And once that turbine goes away, we're going to have to redirect those collection lines to carry the energy back to the substation. So these are more new and modified collection lines than they are upgraded.
All right, good. Well, now that we've talked about the repowering, if we can, let's take the ZBA members through the construction plan. How are we actually going to carry out the repowering?
Perfect. The construction plan has a number of steps. Initially, we'll begin by clearing any necessary vegetation and installing what we call stormwater pollution prevention plan, best management practices. That is typically what we see, the silt fence that's out there to prevent soil erosion and sediment control. And we'll also do topsoil stripping if that's necessary. After this, we'll upgrade the access roads for the cranes and the loads that will be coming down those roads, and install a staging yard or a laydown area for the equipment that will be delivered. These 2 steps get us set up for the turbine work. Then the new turbine components will be delivered to each site location. At that time, the upgrades to the collection and replacement of collection line will be undertaken. And then we'll be installing crane pads, erecting the new turbine generators as necessary. And the erection of the 97 new units will proceed in parallel with the decommissioning of the 17 units. As I said, those will be concurrent. Once the new units are standing, they'll go through the commissioning process, whereby they are actually placed in service and connected to the grid. Then comes cleanup, where the site is restored, the disturbed areas are stabilized, and ground cover can be reestablished as necessary.
And give us an idea what the current, at least thinking is with regard to timeline for this project.
We anticipate that February 21 to about May 21 will be the time frame for mobilization, the completion of the engineering studies, and the preparation. The decommissioning and installation will occur from about June to November of 2021, with December 21 right now targeted as when we expect the repowered project to reach commercial operations.
And you heard me at the beginning of our discussion today talk about road use agreements.
Yep.
And I know it'd probably be of interest to the CBA members. what do we anticipate needing or happening with the roads as part of this repowering process?
We anticipate that some temporary widening of the access roads in the foundation areas in order to facilitate construction. We'll need to build crane pads adjacent to the turbines for the construction process. However, when the construction process concludes, the access roads will be returned to their current width of approximately 16 feet, and the foundation areas will be returned to their current width of about 60 feet.
Okay.
Further, we're in discussion with the various road commissioners to put in place road use agreements with both Lee County, with Bureau County, and the various townships that are involved.
And to describe further for the ZBA members, am I correct that we had road use agreements finalized in 2019 that have timed out since construction did not start?
That's correct. They were good for a year, and since construction didn't start within that year, they timed out, I should say.
And for purposes of 2020, they're correct to say what we've been talking about with the road districts is updating the exhibits to those agreements, some of our transportation plans, et cetera, but we hope to enter into a road use agreement that's similar in material terms to the 2019 agreements.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some new language that will go into those agreements. That language is in draft form right now, but I would argue that 95% of it is the same as the 2019 agreements.
And am I correct, just so everybody knows, that the entities we're working with right now on the road use agreements would be Lee County, Walnut Township, Ohio Township, May Township, Lamoille Township, and East Grove Township?
That is correct.
Then if I could, Mr. Cutie, let's turn our attention again. And now that we've talked about the construction of the project, let's talk about how we plan to decommission the project. And I know that you had previously mentioned that the project had entered into an agricultural impact mitigation agreement. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 8. And this is part of the packet that I handed out to the board last week. If you could describe what's been marked as Petition Exhibit 8 for the members.
Sure. This is the Agricultural Impact Mitigation Agreement. It's an agreement between BSW DevCo, LLC, and the Illinois Department of Agriculture. It was signed on March 6, 2019. It remains effective.
Okay, and are you familiar with this agreement?
Yes, I am.
And if you could take the board through the AMA and how it's related to the project.
Sure. Initially, decommissioning is governed by a number of agreements. The AMA that we just introduced, the individual land leases, as well as explicit decommissioning agreement made with the county. All these ensure that decommissioning is both completed and completed properly and funded properly, with the requirements of removing the turbines, the cabling, and restoring the soil to its original condition. The AMA provides specific procedures for how construction and decommissioning occur, handling issues such as cable deck, decompaction, construction during wet weather, and the like. The process of decommissioning and end of project life will entail the removal of the project turbines, decommissioning the foundations down to 48 inches below the natural grade, removal of the pad mounted transformers, and any underground collection that's up to 48 inches below grade, removal of the road material, and restoration of the site back to its natural grading condition.
Thank you, Mr. Cutie. If you could take the board through sort of a deep dive into how each turbine will be taken down. How are we proposing to do this? What method?
We're proposing to decommission the turbines using one of two different methods. The first method, the proposed, will consist of disassembling the turbine's major components using a crane. This will include the removal of the turbine rotor and blades, the removal of the nacelle, and then the removal of each of the 4 turbine tower sections in sequential steps until all the turbine components are on the ground. Once the major turbine components are on the ground, they will be dismantled and removed from the site. The second proposed method will be the Tiltfeld Method. The Tiltfeld Method is a detailed engineering plan that includes the cutting of the steel tower at the base of the turbine tower section, and with the use of position cables connected to the cell, the turbine will be pulled down in a planned location. The Tilt engineered plan will analyze all critical conditions existing at the time, including wind direction, wind speed, and allowable stresses on the individual units. Once the turbine has been tilted over, the turbines will be dismantled and removed from the site.
And what factors go into deciding which method you're going to choose to use?
It really comes down to the schedule and availability of the equipment. The crane method uses heavy lifting cranes and equipment to dismantle the turbines, and it takes a longer duration to remove each component one by one in the disassembly process. With the Tiltfeld method, we can fell a turbine using medium duty equipment, and it takes very little time to tilt and fell the turbines relative to the dismantling procedure. We're still in the planning stages and talking with 2 contractors right now about both options. We'll be evaluating, their schedules and their pricing, and we think that the Tiltfeld method, gives us greater flexibility to allow us, particularly around schedule, and the process of removing the tower is completed in a shorter amount of time using less equipment. This significantly reduces the duration and the amount of disturbance required for removing a turbine from any site.
And if you could take the members through, how do you ensure that the decommissioning method is done safely?
Both of the options that I described previously require the construction team to have site safety and security teams secure the site to ensure that all non-authorized personnel are cleared from the active project site. These include clearly marked boundaries and visible signs that will alert people to the hazards. Additionally, the use of meetings like the plan of the day and on-site job safety analysis are used to ensure that all authorized workers are informed daily of the tasks being completed and are made aware of the hazards being performed on site. The use of audio and visual signals, with heavy equipment operators is paramount in these processes, and all authorized personnel were required to have the appropriate and proper training and the knowledge of the site safety protocols before being allowed to work, on such a project.
And once a turbine's decommissioned, what happens then? Is it recycled? How are the components dealt with?
The turbines will be salvaged and cut into smaller pieces so that they can be transported off-site. And most of the equipment will be set for recycling and reused to make other projects, particularly the steel components.
Okay. Lastly, you mentioned that there's a number of agreements that are sort of interlocking when it comes to decommissioning, whether it was the landowner leases, the AMA agreements with the county, et cetera. Would those be equally applicable to both the planned decommissioning of the 17 turbines that we've talked about that are part of the original project, and ultimately the remaining 97 when those are decommissioned?
Yes, yes, certainly. Well, when the turbines were originally constructed about 10 years ago, the developer put in place a decommissioning plan committing to both Bureau and Lee counties that the turbines would be decommissioned in a certain way. For the purposes of the 17 turbines that we're talking about that are not being repowered, this is their end of project life, and the existing decommissioning agreement explicitly pertains to them. For the purposes of the repowered turbines, there are specific requirements that will be undertaken by PSW DevCo contained in these agreements to ensure that The repowered units, including the taking down of the older big sky turbines, is done safely and sustainably.
Okay. Mr. Cutie, I'm going to again present you with what's been marked as Petitioner's Exhibit 1, the application. I believe Exhibit K to the application is the decommissioning plan you've been discussing. Is that correct?
That's correct, Exhibit K.
Okay, and this would be the decommissioning plan between the project, Big Sky Wind Power, and the county, correct? And then turning gears briefly for the last time back to the Lee County ordinance. In relation to the topics that we've just been covering, there are a number of specific ordinance provisions that we have to comply with. So I wanted to take you through some of those briefly. First, Lee County requires that the minimum distance between the ground and any wind turbine blades shall be 15 feet, I believe. Will that be the case for any turbine? Will we be able to comply with that provision?
Yes, based on the turbine models that are proposed, it is anticipated that the ground and turbine blades clearance will be over 75 feet.
And additionally, the Lee County ordinance requires posting of warning signs for potential hazard, and then all cables, ropes, and wires around the turbines will need to be marked to avoid harm. Will we be compliant with that provision?
Yes, sir. We have standard signage compliant with all federal, state, requirements, and the turbines themselves are freestanding and do not require ropes or wires to secure them.
Okay. Another ordinance provision states that tower construction is to be done according to all applicable Illinois statutes. I take it goes without saying that we would be compliant with that.
All construction will be compliant with the applicable state statutes.
Okay. And the ordinance requires that all electrical distribution lines shall be located underground. Will this be the case?
All electrical distribution lines will indeed be located underground.
And next, Mr. Cutie, the ordinance requires that all wind turbines shall be designated with an automatic overspeed control to render the system inoperable when the winds are blowing in excess of speeds the machine is designed for. All WEC shall have a manually operable method to render the system inoperable in the event of a structural or mechanical failure of any part of the system, including automatic overspeed control. And all WECs shall be designed with automatic control to render the system inoperable in the case of loss of utility power to prevent the WECs from supplying power to a de-energized electrical distribution system. If you could take the board through that provision and how we intend to comply with that.
Sure. The project will use the aforementioned GE turbines. They have redundant braking systems, which include both aerodynamic overspeed controls, including variable pitch, tip, and other similar systems. And secondly, mechanical brakes. Mechanical brakes are operated in the fail-safe mode. Stall regulations shall not be considered a sufficient braking system for overspeed.
Okay, and I take it this is something GE specifically designs for, right, to be able to meet these criteria?
Yes, indeed. All the manufacturers design similarly.
Okay. A couple final questions, Mr. Cutie. You heard me mention in my open that one of the things that we were seeking was a waiver from a current county requirement that the project be substantially underway within 1 year after the permit issuance. If you could talk briefly about the reasons why we would seek such approval.
Well, I think the number one reason that we're probably all familiar with is COVID-19. But more generally speaking, the need for an additional year covers things that are just in the unknown category. Again, we don't know where COVID-19 is going to go or where that's going to bring us. The availability of contractors, severe weather delays, and the typical development issues that we face on a day-to-day and annual basis.
So it's just really building in some extra timeline security.
That's correct.
Okay, to account for the unknown.
Well put. Yep.
Okay. And then lastly, Mr. Cutie, in section 4.2.9 of the application, which is again Petitioner's Exhibit 1, we asked for, I believe, 10 setback variances. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And those variances are described as Exhibit E to the application?
That's correct. Exactly.
Okay. And if I'm correct, all those variances are seeking the same thing, which is Since the project was originally permitted 2006 and built in 2010, the Lee County ordinance has changed with regard to setbacks. Is that correct?
That's correct. And because we're reusing, foundations and towers, and we don't have the readily available opportunity to move those. The turbines were there back when the ordinances were different. The ordinance has changed since the original construction, and hence the variances. And there's 10 turbines with variances for. Those are described as you suggest in Exhibit E.
Okay, so to allow us to make best use of the land, which is, as you said, to reuse the turbine towers and the foundations, these variances are necessary.
Sure, and to minimize the impact on.
Yep. So it's really a unique characteristic.
Yes, indeed.
Judge, that completes my direct examination of Mr. Cutie.
All right, very good. What else going on? Mr. Boonstra. Questions of this witness?
No questions, thank you, Judge.
Ms. Dutton?
No, I do. Explain what a restrictor is for a turbine?
I'm sorry,
A restrictor?
a restrictor?
Kind of like a braking system? Is that what they would call a restrictor?
I've never heard it called a restrictor. If it's a braking system, I can describe the braking systems.
Yeah, one, you can go ahead and describe them.
Yeah, there's two types of braking systems. One is a mechanical brake, and it is quite the same and quite analogous to a disc brake on an automobile. There's a flywheel, and under certain conditions, if the load is lost or there's an overspeed condition, the brake will apply itself as a disc brake does to stop the unit. And secondly, and more primary, I'm sorry.
I think it came from the Zoom screen.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it. And more primary, brakes are aerodynamic in nature. If the load is lost, right, the turbine blades will feather out of the wind so that they're not taking advantage of any wind. And that'll cause the aerodynamically it to slow down.
So there's two different types of braking?
Two different and absolutely unique. If power is lost, for any reason, the blades will spin out of the wind, all three of them. All three of those are independent on each blade, and it will essentially stall itself.
Okay, thank you.
ZBA members, Mr. Forster,
No questions.
Mr. Burrow.
Yes, a couple things. When you repower this unit or this field out there, are you going to be shutting down sections at a time and still producing electricity in certain sections?
Yes, sir. That is the plan. The project has obligations called capacity obligations to be able to deliver power at any time. And secondary to that, there's no need to shut down the entire project. Think of the project as having 11 different strings or 11 different circuits. And we can take down, we think, 3 or 4 of those at a time and use a crane on an individual circuit. If we use 3 cranes, we'll take down 3 circuits. If we use 4 cranes, we'll take down 4 circuits. And each crew will run down, a string of turbines and either repower them or decommission those as they walk down. So revenue will continue, power generation will continue, albeit a reduced level. but the project will continue to operate at the same time.
In the same thoughts, the decommissioning, then that will be done after the repowering.
It's going to be done at pretty much the same time. If you think of a string of turbines, you know, that crane is going to go straight down that string. If it gets to a turbine that's going to be decommissioned, it's going to decommission it. Rather than break that crane down or go around it, a breakdown on a crane is a costly and time-consuming event. So we're going to send that crane right down. Everything will be staged. They'll repower one. If the next one is coming down, that crane will take it down.
Okay, and referring back to your previous testimony in a couple of weeks ago, the couple of the decommissioned ones are going to be near the wetlands, as I recall. What was the problem that people were talking about with the wetlands? Why you know they don't want to keep using those turbines over near the wetlands and some of the endangered species? I just didn't catch anything there.
I'll ask Terry to talk about that later. But the turbines you're referring to are number 84 and 86, and those are adjacent to the Ryan wetland areas. Which my understanding in the last decade has grown larger and larger and larger, and has been a successful project. And they requested that we take them down, and we're going to comply. But I think Terry will have more to say about that.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Murphy.
How do you determine who gets them and who does not? That's 17 that you take away.
We went through a process to make that determination and came up with some rules. First of all, we wanted to certainly minimize noise and shadow flicker, which were, you know, some historic problems, noise being the larger one. We wanted to minimize the impact to any landowner who had only one turbine. If they only had one, we didn't want to take one away, right? We recognized, though, that they would still receive payments for the collection line that ran across their land. Where a landowner had 2 or 3 or 4 turbines, all other things being equal, it was easy to take one away from them. Also, again, think about 11 strings or 11 circuits. Each one of those circuits carries about 25 megawatts of energy. And the design of the collection system is about that capacity. So we took away approximately, well, at least 1 turbine from every string, because we were putting larger units in so that we could keep the balance somewhat the same. And again, some feedback from the soil and water conservation districts, 84 and 86. Feedback from the town of Ohio was another concern. So hopefully we've chosen the right ones. The last thing that needs to be done, as I mentioned earlier, is the foundation engineer is going to go out and inspect foundations. We've told them the 17 we think that are going away, but if he finds a turbine with a foundation that's somehow cracked or damaged, that turbine might have to go away and one of these might have to stay. We don't expect that to happen by any means, but that's the last step in the decision process.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You.
Yes, I've got a few questions, and actually your last comment leads me into one of those. What's the process for verifying any lack of deficiencies or deficiencies within a foundation?
As I mentioned earlier, the tabletop exercises and the engineering analysis has been done, and all of the foundations now pass. And there's probably 12 or 15 different criteria that have to be analyzed. The foundation design engineer is going to go out into the field next, and he's going to examine those foundations. He's going to look at down in the basement of a turbine you can see a good part of the foundation. He'll look for cracks. He'll look for deficiencies. They'll also examine the bolts, around the base of the turbine and the grouting around the base of the turbine for any issues. The bolts are an interesting thing. They do ping tests on the bolts. And if one is somehow hollowed out and it's a little sub-foundation, it'll ring a different tone. A pretty primitive test, but an effective one. And if they find anything that's condemning, they'll condemn it. The codes and the regulations, tell them what's condemning and what's not condemning.
Okay, that helps particularly with the bolts, but there's an actual basement area in the foundation so that they can get visual inspection of a good share of that foundation?
Yes, indeed. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that was
the critical part of a foundation is where the pedestal meets the mushroom-shaped inverted cone. That is the area where, if you have a problem, that's what typically shows up. And if they have to, they'll actually excavate some of the soil to get a better look at that.
okay. That's what I was wondering. Then also you were talking about replacing cables, collection cables, and within, you didn't specifically state this, but it's section 3.5.1 on page 3.8 of the application. The existing collection cables being replaced will be disconnected electrically from the collection system and left buried in the ground. Why would they be left buried in the ground when you're already exposing them and they're in the process of decommission anyways?
If they're less than 48 inches, or if they're, they are deeper than 48 inches, we'll disconnect them and retire them in place. And that meets the criteria that's in the decommissioning. Just ripping those cables out of the ground will cause more disturbance than anything else. 48 inches is typically picked because that's all below the depth that farm equipment typically reaches.
Okay, so those cables, whether for the 17 that we're talking about now or the final decommission, if they're below 48 inches, are going to just be left in the ground permanently?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Final question. In the decommissioning Exhibit K, there is a copy of a letter of credit, which is the basis for ensuring the financial viability of the decommissioning plan.
That's right.
That letter of credit is dated I think it's 2014, with an expiration date of 2015. The letter of credit provides for an automatic extension of 1 year, which would only take the letter of credit to 2016. Is there a current letter of credit on file? And if so, could we get a copy of it?
I don't know the answer to your question. I do believe there's a current one on file, and certainly you will get a copy of it when we resolve that.
Is from the standpoint of that being financial surety for the county.
Absolutely.
It bothers me to see an old one in this application.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Pratt?
Yes, Judge, I have several questions. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Perfect.
Do you need to see me?
Not necessarily. Do you want to be seen?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Go ahead. I can hear it your voice, so.
Okay. Glenn just asked my first question about the cables being left in the ground. I heard that also. So then the next question I had was, you keep talking about the 2.5s and the 2.3s under the 2.7 format. Why not use all 2.7s and eliminate another 8 towers?
I believe the answer to that, well, using all 2.7s and think about this as just sort of a mathematical exercise would overload certain circuits, right? And again, the typical limit on these circuits is about 25 megawatts. And closer to the substation, the cable is larger, and further away, the cable is smaller. And it has ampacity ratings at its different size. And I think, and I'm not the electrical designer, but I think when you get to the extremes or farthest from the substation, the cable that's in the ground doesn't support 2.7 units.
Okay. So then back to your testimony a couple of weeks ago about the landowners that are decommissioned. Did I understand that they will continue to be paid or they won't continue to be paid?
They will continue to be paid. For example, I want to make sure I understand your question right.
So they continue to be paid for the towers that were decommissioned?
No, they will not. However, they will have, think of, I've got a string of 5 turbines and I take the middle one out, number 3. The collection cable passes through number 3's property. And so they would receive a payment for the collection line that's on their property that transfers energy from one side to the other. So the entire process and the entire program was to ensure that every landowner who was participating back in the original project continues to participate at least at some level in the repower project.
So I assume the original leases with these landowners allows that to happen?
The leases some of those leases were already modified to recognize that a turbine is going away, but collection is still on their particular property.
Okay. So the other thing I throw out here, so we're taking down 117 turbines out of this whole project.
You're taking down 17, not 117.
No, you're taking down 117 of the actual turbines up on top of the towers, correct?
Okay. Yes, we're taking down the nacelles, the blades, the rotors, and the pad mount transformers are all going.
But we've always, as we went through these turbine projects, or these wind turbine projects, we've always had trouble with the decommissioning plans coming up with what is the value at the end of the project. So now we're taking down 117 components here. Surely you have a value that you have placed on them. And it would be an interesting experiment to see how the decommissioning plan would play out with the value you're assigning to them turbines you're taking down. You understand where I'm going with this?
I think I do. Go ahead.
No, I'm just, I would just, you guys
I
have.
don't want to be difficult, but let's ask a question.
Okay. My question is, do you have a value on them 117 turbines that you're taking down?
As the project developer, no, I do not have a value on that. The value of those is, if you will, discounted in the price of the new equipment. And I'll explain it this way. GE, as the supplier of the new equipment, is going to take possession of the old equipment. And they're responsible for the decommission and the scrapping of that equipment. They have agreements with scrappers. They have agreements with, folks who will take and reuse that, equipment. So from the developer's perspective, no, we don't see the value. We see it as some kind of discount, if you will, in the price of the new turbines, but I can't put a number on that. Okay, thank you. Next question. In your testimony a couple of weeks ago, you talked about shadow flicker. Yep. 26 residents would be above the 30-hour shadow flicker. Is that correct? That's correct. So once you remove the towers, you made a comment that you're going to remove towers that cause shadow flicker. Is the 26? Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt there. Is the 26 after you've removed the towers that are causing shadow flicker now? The 26 are exceedances are the result of the 97 turbine array. So the answer is yes, there will be 26 exceedances after that. And it's important to remember that those exceedances are all done on a theoretical basis. In other words, when Burns and Mack does their study, they do it in a very conservative manner, okay? It assumes that the sun is always shining and that there is, shadows every day. When the sun's not shining, that becomes quite muted. So the 26 exceedances are theoretical, and that's the reason subsequent to the construction of the repowered project, Burns and Mack will come back and do an actual shadow flicker study using the same receptors as in the theoretical study. So then you also stated that you were contacting all the affected flickers, people affected by flicker, and getting waivers signed. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. That process is ongoing. Yep. So you are only contacting the 26 above the 30 hours? Is that correct? And getting a waiver from the 26? I believe there's more than the 26 that were, but I'm not positive of the number. There are some waivers that were obtained back in 2019 when there were based on different turbines and different arrays. That I know. And once we've taken those, the 20, some of those are a subset of the 26 that are in the current study. So I'll suggest that the Burns and Mack guys will be able to add much more detail to that. That may be the point to ask my further questions. So also in the process of doing wind turbines, we set up a complaint system. So here we have a project that has been on for 10 years. Do you guys have a history of complaints that have been filed against your company, against this project? I don't know the answer to that. It's not my company. I'm a contractor to the project, and that's just some history I don't have. Perhaps Mr. Stryker knows.
You're just here to answer
testify,
questions.
Okay,
You're under oath.
Yep.
You're going to
Understood.
answer questions.
So then the waivers that are created, that are needed because the towers have, are too close to the setback lines. You stated they were all created because the ordinance had changed.
that's correct, sir.
So are these, and I don't have all my paperwork with me here to look at each of them. So maybe that answer would be in the paperwork, but are they created by non-participating neighbors, or are they all created on participating?
I think it's both, actually. The number, I can give you the turbine numbers if you'd like.
No, that's fine. I'm trying to figure out whether it's, and I guess, have you contacted all them people that are going to be affected by the waivers?
They're all the waivers, and I'll just correct that. Page 4.6 of the section 4.2.9 that you referenced earlier, all of the ordinance waivers are from participating project landowners. It's not anticipated we'll seek any non-participating waivers in the county.
Okay, that's all my questions, Judge.
Thank you. Come on here. Okay, let's see if any interested parties have questions. The only interested parties are those on Zoom. And to raise your hand, I see Mr. Lawson has his hand raised. Mr. Lawson, if you can hear me, we'll unmute you, and questions of Mr. Tucci.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
Okay, thank you. I just had a couple quick questions. The first question is, when this was originally planned back 10 years ago, what was the life expectancy of the current turbines?
It was 20 years at that time.
Okay, what's the current expectancy of the turbines now that you're putting up?
20 years, and that 20 years is based on what we think is the limiting element, and that's the foundations.
Okay, so if it was 20 years and you're adding another 20, you could possibly go over the 10 years then with the actual bases and the towers. I guess you.
No, I perhaps you misunderstood. We are, think of it this way, we are recertifying these foundations, which I think you referred to as the base of the towers. We are recertifying these foundations for 20 years forward.
Okay. Is it possible that in 10 years a newer turbine could come out and we'd be back in this process again?
I think it's entirely possible that could happen. My non-structural engineering thoughts, though, suggest that the foundations would not be good for another 20 years.
Okay. How the whole project is total, what I think you mentioned, 240 megawatts?
239.4,
Okay.
I believe. Yeah.
How many acres does a tower occupy?
How many acres?
Or how much land, I guess, does one tower occupy? Whether it's an acre or...
Well, when you think about, the footprint of a tower, as a developer, I think that the footprint is probably a 60-foot radius around the base of a tower, and, the driveway or the approach road that goes to it. if your question is different, how many turbines could I put on an acre? That's a different question.
Okay, I guess let me rephrase my question. With there's roughly 100 towers that you will be done after
97, correct, sir.
So how many acres would you say those 107 towers occupy?
I would say that I would calculate that 60-foot radius and multiply that by 97 and add some roads in there. But if you're asking me about the project dimensions, right, there's probably closer to 20,000 acres that the project itself sits on.
Okay, so, but I guess my question would be each individual tower. And I guess to maybe help you understand the question, I'm comparing them to, we're actually looking or considering allowing a solar farm to occupy 3,843 acres to produce 500 megawatts. I'm just curious how, and I'm just curious how this compares to something like that.
Yeah.
That's not a question. Just please, just ask no question.
Okay, how many acres does each tower occupy? A half acre?
I guess more like a quarter of an acre.
Quarter of an acre.
Yeah.
Okay, so how times 107 is how many acres?
Times 97.
Okay, 90. I'm sorry, 97.
Let's just say 100 quarter acres. That's 25 acres.
So you could possibly do a 500 megawatt project on 50 acres.
You'd crowd wind turbines in there, and you wouldn't have a very efficient one, but yes, you can do it.
Okay. Now, are there any fences around these wind farms?
No.
No high fences or barbed wire fences?
No, sir.
Are there any security lights or cameras on these towers?
No security lights. There's FAA lights on the top of these towers on very specific units as defined by the FAA.
Okay. Do these towers only produce wind or do these towers only produce power when the sun shines?
When the wind blows?
Well, I guess do they only produce during the day?
Mr. Lawson, please. Question was, do these towers only produce power when the sun shines?
The answer is no.
Okay. So do these towers produce power at night?
Yes.
Do these towers have the potential of producing power 24 hours a day?
Yes.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
I see Marty Montalban. If you have questions, Marty, we'll unmute you. I see your hand's not raised, but I didn't want to go through the explanation since you're the only one on Zoom, other one on Zoom. If you got questions, we'll unmute you. Marty, do you have any questions?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
In regards to those variances that we signed in 2019, do those have to go back and be re-signed again now also?
No, sir.
And how do we get a copy of those? Did you hear me?
Yes, I did. I'm trying to think of the most efficient way here. If you, do you typically contact the folks at the O&M building over in, right here in Lee County?
We have, but not with much luck with that stuff. Another landowner and myself both were questioning where those variances that we signed went to, and we never got a copy sent to us anytime.
Okay. Well, I can follow up on that and get you the variance.
Okay, and then I'm sorry.
It would be in your name, sir?
Yes. Well, yeah. Yes. There's several names. My wife's too. It's a trust.
Any other questions?
Also about the decommissioning and the tilt method where you drop them, what about regards to foundations of houses that are very close to some of those? Have you thought about that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
When that thing falls and hits the ground, is it going to damage current foundations that are nearby?
Oh, yes, the engineering team that has done the work on the Tiltfeld method has taken that into consideration.
Okay. So each turbine is different in that respect?
Each one is unique, yes, sir.
Okay. That's all I have.
Thank you. Allison, am I missing anybody else on Zoom?
No.
Okay. Very good. Let's take a break and we'll pick up in the 25 afternoon. How about
You are not.
folks who are waiting for us, apologize for the delay. We're trying to work out some
Break it down.
technical issues with the next presentation, so bear with us. We're not ignoring you. here, so we're ready to begin. Sir, you want to raise your right hand? You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Let's see. I think, Mr. Cutie, if you'd give up your seat, I hate to boot you like that, but actually,
You want to put him there?
It's the same amount. It's the
Zen. Okay. You mean what?
Mr. Vanderwall, would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
It's Terry Vanderwall, Terry, VAN, capital DE, capital WALL.
And what's your current business address?
2300 Swan Lake Boulevard, Suite 202, Independence, Iowa, 50644.
Okay. And could you briefly describe your applicable educational background for the board members?
Sure, yeah, so I have a Bachelor of Science degree in animal ecology and a master's degree in that.
And where are those from?
The bachelor's is from Iowa State University and the master's is Drake.
All right. And how are you currently employed, sir?
I currently work as a principal biologist for Stantec Consulting Services.
Okay. And do you specialize in any particular area or field?
In my office is primarily a renewables office. And so most of the work we do, probably 90% of the work we do is with wind. We also do some solar. And we really specialize in both pre and post-construction surveys for birds and bats. We also do wetlands, cultural resources, really all of the pre-construction surveys for wind farms. And then we also do bird and bat, or really bat and eagle permitting for wind farms.
And what are your current job duties?
So my current job is I do manage our Independence, Iowa office, and I then supervise a team that does work on again on these wind farms. And so we, with these pre-construction surveys, we're doing bat surveys, and post-construction we go out and looking for animals, dead birds and bats, the turbines. And so my job is really to supervise the studies that are done and the documents that are produced.
Okay. And how long have you been working in this industry?
I've been a environmental consultant for 30 years now. I've been working in the renewables field for 4 years.
And tell us a little bit about your employer, Stantec.
Sure. Stantec is a really an international company. It's headquartered in Edmonton, Alberta. We do have 250 offices here in North America, and a little over 3,900 environmental engineering staff between Canada and the United States. You have a little over 250 offices here in the Midwest, with our Midwest group, and we have provided environmental and engineering services for probably close to 500 wind farms now between the United States and Canada.
Okay, and you said you work primarily in the renewable industry currently, is that correct?
I do, yeah. So again, my office primarily renewables. We have worked on a little over 150 wind farms in 21 states at this point, and including 35 here.
Okay, that was my next question, if you worked in the one before. And sir, I understand that you're here tonight to testify about the wildlife studies that have been done for the project, right? Okay. And have you prepared a presentation?
Yes.
And sir, I'm going to hand you what I'm going to mark as petitioner's exhibit number 9. You can take a look at that for me and let me know if you recognize that.
So this is the presentation that I'll present.
Okay, did you personally prepare this presentation?
I did.
And if I had missed anybody with a copy of the presentation, I have that procedure if anybody would like one. And prior to turning things over to you, if you could just tell the board briefly what the purpose of your testimony is here today.
The purpose is to really review the studies that my company, that I and my company have done at the site, and to kind of discuss where we are as of now.
Okay. And that was a perfect segue, I think, into my last series of questions for you, which is, I'm showing you now what's been marked as petitioner's exhibit number 1, which is the special use permit application that's issued in this hearing. On page 2.3 of that application, specifically section 2.2.2, it's entitled Stand Tech, is that correct?
Yes,
And this is just another history of the company that you've already provided?
that's correct.
And then flipping forward in the application on page 4-8, and specifically section 4.2.15, that's entitled Wildlife and Avian Survey and Mitigation Plan, is that correct?
Correct.
And is this one of the aspects that you and Stantec worked on with regard to this application?
Yes.
And next, I'm going to turn to section 4.3.11 of the application, which is entitled Further Bat Conservation Study.
Correct.
Is it also correct to say that that's another aspect of this application that Stantec and you have worked on?
Yes, that's a document.
Flipping forward to Exhibit C to the application, there's information provided about Stantec, is that correct? And to the best of your knowledge, is this information accurate and up to date?
Yes.
Okay. And then lastly, a copy of your professional curriculum details included, is that correct?
Yeah, that's my renewables.
Okay.
So
And is there,
limited to just the wind farm work.
okay, so this CV is just really pertinent to the wind farm work, which is what we're going to talk about today.
That's great.
And is this current and up to date?
Yes, minus a couple projects probably. Yes.
Okay. And then I'm flipping forward to Exhibit F to the application, which is entitled Site Characterization Study.
Correct.
Is that a study you're going to talk about tonight?
Yes.
Okay, prepared by you and Stantec?
Mr. Vanderwall, can you do us a favor? Every place is different. I understand that you practically got to swallow the microphones in here. You really do.
So just to confirm that Exhibit F to the application, which is marked Site Characterization Study, that was prepared by Stantec themselves?
Correct.
And lastly, sir, Exhibit H to the application is entitled Bird Bat Conservation Study. I take it the same answer would apply.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, Terry, why don't I turn it over to you to talk to the board and take them through the presentation.
All right. All right, well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. If we can we'll just maybe quickly move through the first couple slides. The first slide, again, just my qualifications, which we've already covered. The next one is about Stantec, which is already covered. Great. Well, the Big Sky project, we did start working on this. At least this repower project we started working on in 2018. And one of the first things we did was, and again, my company's role here is really the environmental piece of this. So the birds and the bats, and then threatened endangered species. And so one of the first things we did in December of 2018 then was to contact the Illinois DNR through what's known as their EcoCat consultation. So EcoCat is an online system where we can insert the project boundary. So we tell the system where the project is at, and then this online system will tell us if there are any known occurrences of threatened or endangered species in the area. And then so we did that in the first time anyway, in December of 2018. Subsequent to that, though, the project boundary changed, so we resubmitted it a couple of weeks later, got the new EcoCat report. We'll come back and talk more about the EcoCat here in a little bit when we discuss threatened and endangered species. But after we got the threatened and endangered species information from the Illinois DNR, we did have a meeting with them in January of 2019 to discuss again the project and any impacts on threatened and endangered species. After that, we prepared the a threatened and endangered species risk assessment. That was primarily for the listed turtles. We'll come back to that here in a few minutes as well. After that, again, we met with the Illinois DNR again to discuss that risk assessment. Really, all of this was designed to reduce, to minimize and avoid the impacts to the listed species, particularly the turtles, throughout the process. We then, it was determined at some point that there could be an impact to the listed turtles, and so the Illinois DNR suggested that the project pursue an incidental take authorization for the project. Since listed turtles, this is threatened or endangered species, are protected under Illinois law. This incidental take authorization is required if there be any mortality to those species. And so we did prepare that incidental take authorization. It was completed, it was submitted to the Illinois DNR, went out on public notice, went all the way through the comment period, we received no comments. The Illinois DNR was essentially ready to issue the permit, but at that point the project was put on hold. And so the incidental take permit was not issued. However, in just past November of 2020, I did contact the Illinois DNR to start that process up again. And Illinois DNR has indicated that they should be able to just issue the permit now. We'll make some modifications to the applicant for that, but should not have to go back up in public notice. Next slide, please. So just quickly to kind of run through what the studies that we did. We did a desktop habitat assessment and then some field studies for species of concern as are described in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's land-based wind energy guidelines. And these guidelines are really set forth this tiered approach for how we should evaluate a site to determine whether there are concerns for essentially birds and bats, listed species. So just quickly, the three tiers. The first tier is we do look at the site on a landscape perspective. So how does the site fit into the bigger landscape of the county or even the state? And what are the native communities, ecological communities, or really broad scale wildlife issues. Tier 2, then we drill down to just the site. Now we look at the project site, and we determine, what specific habitats are there unique habitats in the project area. This is where we do that EcoCat search to determine if there are threatened or endangered species that are known from the project area. And then tier 3 are the field studies. These are studies where we would actually go out into the project site and maybe do on-site habitat assessments, or for some projects there may be actual wildlife studies. So the land-based wind energy guidelines is the process that the Fish and Wildlife Service recommends that you follow for these, for evaluating the risk of a project to wildlife. That is the process we follow. That's also the process then that's documented or described in the site characterization report that we prepared.
This is the site characterization report in the application.
That's correct. So we'll step through just a few of these things, taking a look at, really this is kind of now tier 2, where we jumped into looking at the project site. One of the things we look at is land cover. We're looking for natural habitats within the project area. And I think this will probably be no surprise to anyone, but this site is primarily agricultural. About roughly 87% of the project area is is cropland, so corn and beans. There's a little bit of woodland, and there's also some developed land. So if you look at the agricultural lands and the developed lands together, it's over 90% of the project. But there is some suitable habitat in the form of woodland there. Very little grassland or open water or wetlands. Next slide, please. Next slide does look at wetlands, and so this is a desktop assessment for wetlands. We use the National Wetlands Inventory for this. So this is publicly available wetland information. And what you can see again is that very little wetland is here. Wetlands, things like cattail marshes or other types of wetlands like that. Very, very little of that. Primarily what's in this project area are, at least with this system, maps as wetlands or streams. Some of these streams might be intermittent streams, meaning they don't always have water in them. National Wetlands Inventory tends to overestimate the wetlands. But again, in general, you can see there's very little wetland. We look at wetlands because it's a potential habitat for wildlife. Next slide, please. So land-based wind energy guidelines do list certain species of concern, and we'll just kind of step through those. They call them species of concern, although the first group are migratory birds, which really includes a lot of different species. But migratory birds would be the typical birds that you would expect to see, things like cardinals and robins, blue jays. Those are all migratory birds. What we do see in this area is that there really is limited nesting habitat. Again, there's some woodland and there's a little bit of wetland in the area. That's primarily where we would expect to see nesting habitat for these birds. Most of these birds are not going to nest in crop fields. Active crop fields are not suitable nesting habitat. Again, it's the majority of the project area doesn't provide suitable nesting habitat, but there is a little bit. We did take a look at the what's publicly available for what's known for which species of birds are found there, and for that we used the Breeding Bird Survey. Breeding Bird Survey is an annual survey. They go out every June. They go out to the same routes every June, and they look at the same survey points and record the birds that they've seen. You can see on the slide here that it's the closest Breeding Bird Survey route to this project isn't actually run through the project area, but it gets very close. It's within 15 miles of the project area, and you can see that the species that they see there are all very common species you expect to see. So crows and robins, barn swallows, brown-headed cowbirds, grackles, house wrens, starlings. These are all common species you expect to see in an agricultural landscape in the Midwest. Dick thistles that are on the list, they're a little more of a grassland bird, but pretty commonly nest in ditches and things like that. So again, red and black is very common. So these are nothing really a surprise here in the species that they're seeing along this Breeding Bird Survey. Eagles are one of the other groups that the land-based energy guidelines address. Again, there's sort of limited habitat for nesting for eagles. Eagles typically will, they nest around a food source. And so food sources in general are large lakes and other large bodies of water. However, kind of here in the Midwest, when you're not along the river or you're not out in you're not around a lake, livestock operations will work as well. A lot of times the livestock operators will, if they have a dead animal, they take it out and put it in the field, and that animal will attract eagles as well. I'm not sure that there's any large-scale livestock operations in the project area, but typically not a lot of suitable habitat for eagles. Now, having said that, today, this day and age, eagles could really be seen. So would not be a surprise to, to see one pass through the area. There are no nests that I'm aware of. We also looked at another source of publicly available information, the Christmas bird count. Christmas bird counts are conducted by the Audubon Society. They, as their name implies, they're done on Christmas Day, and they go out to the same location every year, and they have a number of surveyors that, or observers that will look for birds. During the Christmas bird count, surveys have been done at a site that, or at a location that's about 2.5 miles northwest of the project. They have seen eagles there during the winter, so 82 eagles have been observed since 2017. So again, not a surprise to see eagles from the Midwest. These are winter birds, so they're not nesting. They're just birds that are moving through. And if there's a food source, then they stay. During those breeding bird surveys that I mentioned, though, those again are conducted during the nesting season. Since 1966, there's only been one bald eagle observed during those surveys. So again, that really points to the fact that there's likely not nesting eagles here. We're not seeing them during nesting season. The other raptors, those are other birds of prey, so hawks, owls, falcons, those kinds of things. The most commonly observed raptors or birds of prey, again, are pretty common here in the Midwest. Things like screech owls, red-tailed hawks, great horned owls, horned kestrels. Those are all common Midwestern species that you see here in Illinois. Those were all during the Christmas bird count, but very similar species seen during those breeding bird surveys as well. So we know that there is some bird mortality at wind turbines. Wind turbines will kill some birds, although bird mortality is typically less than bat mortality. When wind really took off here in the United States, everyone was concerned about birds, and we thought there'd be a lot of bird mortality. As it turns out, bird mortality has been lower than bat mortality. We'll talk about bats here shortly. Nevertheless, the project is taking some measures to reduce overall bird mortality at the site. One of those is that the turbines are self-supporting. They're unguided, so no cables or wires that come off of the turbines, like you would see on a radio tower maybe or something like that. It is those guy wires that are the most dangerous for the birds. The birds fly into those. So these turbines are unguided. The collection and communication lines are buried. That avoids any kind of electrocution risk for eagles or other birds. Also in accordance with the land-based wind energy guidelines, the project's substation lights will be a low voltage light, and they'll be pointed downward, so they'll be downshielded. That's important because, for instance, the fog we've been having here in the last few days, it's on these foggy nights that many birds, or that birds are often killed at wind turbines because they can't see, the turbines as they fly through. Now, most birds, as they're migrating through, they're flying higher than the turbine, so there's really no risk. The risk is when they fly down, right? When they fly down through that rotor source. What we know is that lights at a substation, or lights at the base of a turbine, for instance, those lights, the birds will home in on. They'll see those, they'll fly down towards the light. That's when they fly. So by putting these, the low voltage lights and down shielding them, you can reduce those mass mortality events that occur in turbines. And that's been shown to be very effective. And again, the land-based wind energy guidelines recommends that. In addition, all employees on site will be required to turn off the internal lights on the turbines. Really, it's for the same reason. You open the door to the turbine, there's lights in there. If they leave the light on the inside and close the door, you might see light around the edge of the door. sealed tightly. That light could attract birds. So again, turning lights off inside reduces bird mortality. And then personnel at the site, will receive periodic environmental awareness training, and they'll be instructed to look for wildlife injuries and mortalities, and the project will have a wildlife incident reporting system.
One question, Terry. These are all federally mandated, or not mandated, but federal recommendations for reducing bird mortality?
That's correct. Yeah.
And the project will be complying with all those recommendations?
That's right, yeah. All of these are recommended either through the land-based wind energy guidelines or other guidance from the Fish and Wildlife Service. They're also recommended, at least the varying of the collection lines and things like that are recommended by an industry group that as a way to prevent electrocutions.
So we're following best practices here.
That's correct. All right, threatened and endangered species. So this is that EcoCat search. We did the EcoCat search, and EcoCat search came up with a list of species. There's seven species that came up on that list. You can see that 5 of those are plants. Actually, 4 are plants. 1 is a butterfly. We did habitat assessments for these, and really none of the plants have the potential to occur in the areas where the repowering would occur. And so, of this list of 7 species, it was really only the Ornate box turtle and the Blanding's turtle that were of concern. What we did find is that there was highly suitable habitat for the Blanding's turtle and the Ornate box turtle at the Ryan wetland in Sandbury. Actually, my company, in fact, I did the original environmental work for Big Sky when it was built the first time, and we identified the Ryan area at that time as a concern for the turtles. I do know there was a question earlier about those 2 turbines that this time around they asked to remove. I will say that when we did the original work for Big Sky 10 years ago, the project at that time was asked to set the turbines back, I believe it was a quarter mile from the Ryan wetland in Sandbury, and they did, and the project did that at the time. I think that the difference now is that, yeah, the site has expanded, they've added some acreage to it, and so some of those turbines are now closer than they were originally. That's the reason for the request to remove those turbines. What we did is we identified that based on habitat, known habitat for the Blanding's turtle and the Ornate box turtle, we identified 22 turbines that were located within 1 mile of the Ryan wetland in Sandbury as potentially risky. We actually then added 2 additional turbines that are located outside of that, but are in close enough proximity to known turtle occurrences, where turtles have been seen, as risky as well. Of the 22 potentially risky turbines, there were 14 that were identified as posing a risk during construction. So one thing to keep in mind with the turtles is that the risk to the turtles is during construction. It's while the equipment is driving back and forth. The trucks, essentially trucks running on the turbines. The turtles are not at risk to the spinning turbines, to the operating turbines. It's really, so it's only during construction. When we did the original work a couple of years ago for this, there were turbines, there were new foundations that were going to be installed at the time. Some of the turbines were going to move. That's no longer happening, and so the risk to the turtles is actually less now than it was before, because those turbines are no longer going to be moving, and as a result, there's fewer trucks on the road. So again, remember the trucks driving back and forth are really the concern for the turbines. Next slide, please. This is kind of already on the screen, but you have it in your handouts. But these are those 14 turbines that we we consider to be the riskiest. This also shows the Ryan and Sand Prairie as well. Next slide, please. So because we knew that there was risk to the turtles, the project is going to be taking some measures to again either avoid or minimize that risk. And so during the repowering activities, activities around those 14 turbines that we determined were going to be the most risky, exclusion fence will be put up. This is really just silt fence. It's put up around the perimeter of the construction area. That prevents turtles from getting in. So if there are turtles in the area, they can't get into the perimeter. That really stints the construction. If there are turtles on the inside, then there's a biomonitor that will pick those up and move them back to the outside. So one of the other conservation measures is there will be a biomonitor on site at the time. So they'll put the fence in, and while they're installing that fence, the biomonitor will walk ahead of the equipment to make sure there's no turtles in the way, so they're not run over by the equipment as they're installing the exclusion fence. The exclusion fence will have turn back wings at the end. So what happens is turtles are on the outside of the fence, they walk along, they hit that fence, they walk along the fence. Well, at the ends will be turned back around to turn the turtles back around. And then again, the biomonitor will be there to visually search the fence, make sure it stays upright, and to make sure that there's no turtles. The fence will also be buried so the turtles don't get injured. For construction, there will also need to be the crane paths. If those crane paths have to cross suitable habitat, the biomonitor will be there as well. So really the measures are exclusion fence to keep the turtles out, a biomonitor, and a person's physically there looking for the turtles in harm's way and do construction.
One question, Terry. Can the biomonitors actually pick up and move a turtle?
Yes,
sorry,
they
to
can.
repeat my question. Can the biomonitors pick up and remove a turtle if they see one in the way?
Yes, they can. Yeah, there are permits that are required from the Illinois DNR for that, but the biomonitor will get those permits. And yeah, that's. I mentioned the incidental take authorization. That's actually one of the conservation measures is picking them up and moving them, and then getting the permits. All right, well, moving on to bats, as I mentioned before, birds are a concern at wind farms, but so are bats. There are two federally and state listed bat species whose ranges include Lee County, and that is the Indiana bat, federally endangered, state endangered, and then the northern long-eared bat, federally threatened, state threatened. We did do a habitat assessment, and essentially the habitat assessment for the bats is looking at the woodlands. So these bats are here during the summertime. The females come up here, and the females will form their maternity colonies under the bark of dead and dying trees. So females crawl up under loose bark, and that's where they have their pups. And a bunch of females all congregate under the same, or on the same tree under the bark, and they all have their babies. So what we can do then is to assess for summer habitat is to see where the woodland is. And so you can see that we did a habitat assessment, and this essentially mirrors that woodland that the National Land Cover database has as well. But you can see that there is suitable summer habitat within. Well, again, because the project recognized that there is risk to bats, the project is taking some measures to reduce risk to bats as well. And so one of those, and probably one of the most important, is that the cut-in speed of the turbines, at least of some of the turbines, is going to be raised. So the cut-in speed is the wind speed at which the turbines begin spinning and generating power. What we know is that there's this inverse relationship between bat activity and wind speed. As wind speed goes up, bat activity goes down. And that makes sense because these bats are very small animals. And when the wind is blowing really strong, they can't fly in that strong wind. It's just, they're just not able to do that. In addition, the bats feed on insects, and those insects can't fly when the wind speeds are strong either. So one of the ways, and currently the most effective way of reducing bat mortality, overall bat mortality, is to raise that cut-in speed. So the turbines are not spinning on those low wind speed nights. So the conservation measure here is that from April 1 through July 31, so that's the spring and at least the first part of the spring and summer as far as the bats are concerned. From sunset to sunrise, the turbine cut-in speeds can be raised raised to 5 meters per second. So it'll be raised from the manufacturer's rated cut-in speed up to 5 meters per second, and all turbines that are within 1,000 feet of suitable habitat. So the important point there is that 1,000 feet. These bats, Indiana bats, northern long-eared bats, they're woodland bats. They tend not to stray out from the woodlands by more than 1,000 feet. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has this has a guideline guideline recommending that turbines within 1,000 feet have the cut-in speed raised. If the turbines are more than 1,000 feet, then there's not a need to raise that cut-in speed because the bats are not. So in this case, with turbines that are within 1,000 feet of suitable habitat, the cut-in speed will be raised during the spring and summer to 5 meters per second. Turbines that are more than 1,000 feet, the cut-in speed will remain at the manufacturer's cut-in speed of 3 meters per second. And then during the fall migration period, August 1 through October 15th, this is typically the period when there's the most risk to bats. During that period, August 1 through October 15, the cut-in speed will be raised to 5 meters per second at all turbines, because again, we recognize that is the riskier season. So the hub is not going to be locked. The turbine blades won't be locked in place. They'll be turning very slowly, but the blades will be pitched into the wind so that they turn very slowly. They're not going to be free. That 5 meters per second is the conservation measure that's recommended by the Illinois DNR. In fact, Illinois DNR considers that to be avoidance of impact for Indiana bats and northern long-eared bats. They consider that if you raise cut-in speeds to 5 meters per second, you would not need an incidental take permit for the bats. And as it says on the slides, what we know is that feathering the blades to 5 meters per second can reduce overall bat mortality by 47 to 87%. Generally, we say around an average of 50%. So overall bat mortality drops by about 50% just by raising the cut-in speed to 5.
Sorry, let me ask you a quick question with regard to this slide. You have listed up your bat conservation measures, correct? Would you consider all these to be best practices or current best practices for minimizing bat mortality in the area?
Yes, these are either recommended by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Illinois DNR, and in most cases also by the American Energy Association.
And the project will be following all the minimization measures you've laid out here, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, for as I mentioned, we did the EcoCat consultation, and the result of the EcoCat consultation then is that the Illinois DNR does provide a consultation letter to the county with a number of recommendations. And so we want to just kind of quickly go through these. This is the letter that was Illinois DNR's letter that was dated March 1st, 2019. And so the first of those recommendations is that the department recommended the county considering requiring 3 years of post-construction mortality monitoring. So this is where you go out after the turbines are constructed, and we look for those dead birds and bats under the turbines. And so the DNR recommended 3 years of study in a way to statistically quantify bird and bat mortality. And then the department requested or recommended a proposal, a plan to do that study as well. So in this case, Big Sky agrees to comply with this recommendation. The project will conduct three fall seasons of post-construction monitoring. Again, fall is the period of most risk to the bats. So the project will conduct 3 fall seasons, and standardized searches will be conducted. And these standardized searches are conducted in a way that provides the statistical results or the statistical power that the Illinois DNR is looking for in their recommendation. These are all pretty standard studies. Lots of projects are doing these, and methods are typically pretty much the same in all projects. The findings then, we will prepare, or the project will at some point prepare a post-construction monitoring plan that will be submitted to the county as well. And then the project will maintain records of all the wildlife fatalities that are found at the site, and it will estimate bird bat mortality as recommended by the DNR. And then the annual report will also be provided to the county and to DNR. Actually, Lee County. I see this. Sorry, I see the slides still says real county. As of right now, again, the Illinois DNR considers that 5 meters per second to be avoided, so they're not recommending an incidental take permit for the bats. However, if at some point the bird and bat mortality study does indicate that the project poses a risk to either Indiana or northern long-eared bats, the project will consider pursuing an incidental take permit.
And Terry, if you could just briefly describe to the board what an incidental take permit is. If I'm correct, it's where you describe to the Illinois DNR what best practices are, and if they agree and you comply with those best practices, at that point you will have accidentally perhaps harmed one of these animals, and the permit allows you to do that. If you describe that a better way or confirm that's the case?
Sure. Yeah. So again, threatened and endangered species are protected under the Illinois Endangered Species Act or Species Law, and so it is against it's against the law to undertake an action that that harms those, either kills or injures those animals. Now, it is illegal for this intentional take. So if you were to go out, for instance, and you wanted to shoot an Indiana bat, let's say, or you wanted to pick up or kill a landing strip, right? That would be illegal, where you've gone out with the intent of doing that. However, there are activities that are where there's incidental take. So incidental take is take that is incidental to, but not the purpose of, an otherwise lawful activity, like operating a wind farm. So the state and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well recognizes that this incidental take may occur at times. And so, operating a wind turbine may result in death of an Indiana bat or long bat, let's say. And so there are permits that allow for that incidental take. And yeah, in order to get that permit, whether it's a federal permit or a state permit, you have to prepare a conservation plan. The conservation plan describes the risks to the species, what we think that take will be, how many of these animals do we think are going to be killed over the life of the project, and then what conservation measures we take to avoid or minimize that. And then presumably you avoided or minimized the take, you reduce that take to a small enough number that the state could then issue the incidental take permit, which then allows for the take, the killing of those whatever the animal is, but only up to the number that the conservation plan said it would do. The project would result in mortality of 10. You could only take 10 over the life of the project. All right, recommendation 2 then actually is the recommendation where the county is recommending a cut-in speed of 5 meters per second at the turbines, and then recommendation 3 is feathering the blades when turbines are not in operation. As I described earlier, those are 2 measures that the project is going to undertake. So again, raising cut-in speeds to 5 meters per second. Turbines that are within 1,000 feet of suitable habitat from April 1st through July 15th, and then from April, so we're going to raise cut-in speeds to 5 when the air temperature is above 50. At 50 degrees is important because the bats and their insect prey typically are not flying around, they're not feeding below 50. So they're going to raise cut-in speeds when wind speeds or when temperatures above 50 at those turbines that are within 1,000 feet, and then in the fall, that cut-in speeds will be raised at all turbines in the fall. The risk is. Next slide, please. So this recommendation was that in this case, the county or the DNR recommended that the county consider the applicant pursue an incidental take permit. However, this project, because they're going to raise to 5, and the state no longer considers cut-in speeds if you raise your cut-in speed, they don't consider that cut-in speed of 5. They don't consider that to be take anymore. So because of the measures, they're going to be implemented in recommendations 1, 2, and 3. This one is not going to be adopted. So that's really what this recommendation is saying is if you adopt the measures in recommendations 1, 2, and 3, you don't need that. Recommendation 5 then is to the department recommends the avoidance and minimization measures for turtles that were discussed in the technical memorandum. This was Stantec's document in February of 2019. If we implement these, then the project or the DNR is recommending we pursue an incidental take permit. So these are the measures we discussed before: the exclusion, fencing around the construction areas, the biomonitor, those types of things. Recommendation 6 then was is essentially just recommending that the project get an incidental take permit for the 2 turtles, running box turtles and landing turtles. And as I mentioned, Big Sky is currently pursuing that. As I said before, it already went through basically the whole process, and we're just updating the conservation plan to state that turbines are not going to be moved, won't be any new locations, and that's really the only change. DNR has indicated that it should not have to go back out to public notice because we essentially already evaluated the worst case scenario. The impacts are actually less now than we stated in the conservation plan. And then lastly, recommendation 7, although there was another species, the plains hognose snake, that did not come up in the EcoCat search, but Illinois DNR had some concerns for that species because they have some records that are within 6 miles of the project area. However, and so the DNR's recommended that it's not taken. We did a habitat assessment for this snake in the project area, and in those, it uses much of the same area, much of the same habitat as the Ornate box turtle. They both use really sandy soils. So it's the same 14 turbines that were at risk, where the box turtles are at risk. It's those same turbines that are risky to the snake. Those same conservation measures that are out there for the turtles work for the snake as well. So given there are no records within close proximity to the project area, there's even more limited habitat for the snake, and the conservation measures that'll already be employed also protect the snake. The project has chosen not to pursue an SLT permit for that species at this time. Again, DNR has some records for that project.
And Terry, to wrap this up, I'm going to present you with Lipton March's petitions exhibit number 6. You take a moment to familiarize yourself with that document. Have you seen this before?
Yes.
And if you could describe to the board members what this is.
So this is the letter that I prepared in response to the Illinois DNR consultation.
Okay, and that covers all the topics that you just went through in your presentation.
That's correct.
And this is how those originally, how the county was informed of their plan. Thank you. Judge, that completes Mr. Van Wolf's direct testimony.
All right. Mr. Bloomster, any questions of Mr. Van Wolf?
Thank you.
Duffy? How about board members? Mr. Forster?
No questions.
Mr. Burrow?
No, very good presentation.
Mr. Bolte?
No questions.
Mr. Hughes?
No questions.
Mr. Pratt?
No questions.
Okay. How about other interested parties? Mr. Lawson, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. How about Marty Modovan?
Yes, I have a question. Did I understand the witness correctly that he said the size of the Ryan
Just
wetland?
ask him. You're asking me. Just ask him.
Has the size of the Ryan wetland increased since this project first started in 2010? Is that what you said?
That's my understanding, that there has been additional area added to it.
I wasn't aware of that. I'm turbine number 86, in case you're wondering, is one of mine. And
You're just making statements now, Mr. Modovan. Now it's just the time for questions.
I just asked if that was any larger, and I didn't think it was.
Yeah, he answered it. So any other questions?
That's all.
Okay, great. That's all the Zoom. Look, without killing my neck, is that all the Zoomers? Yeah, it's okay. Great. All right. Very good. We will recess from tonight until tomorrow night, Tuesday, January 5th. Also, 6 o'clock here in the 3rd floor courtroom of the old Lee County Courthouse. Everybody be safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody healthy.
7 o'clock.